Year 10. So I'm going to go through this week's home learning assignment. Before I do, basically, as you will have seen from the classroom, I'm asking you to take another set of photos this week, and I'm expecting you to do some planning for that as well. Some of you are coming in on Friday. I would really like you to either print your photos and print one that you would like to work from for Friday's session, or to send me your pictures if you can't print, and let me know which one you want printed, which ones or one you want printed larger for drawing from. That will not only help with your home learning, it will also help with your project moving forward. And in fact, if any of you would like to have your pictures printed, because when you get your summer project booklets, a lot of the work that's set in there is based on you working from photos. So all those drawing exercises, you'll need to have photos. So if anyone would like to have photos printed, hopefully you've listened to this. I will put a message there as well. Just send me your request and I will get them printed in school and leave them in reception for you. If you can do that as soon as possible, that would be great. Obviously, I'm going to be in on Friday, so if you've got a session on Monday and that's it, then you may need to come in especially to pick them up. Again, if you need things posted to you, just let me know. Within reason, I can't post anything heavy, but I can post the photos. Right, okay, so I'm asking you this week to produce a photography planning page for a new photo shoot, and 30 photos, and I would like you to complete the 20-question quiz. And I would also like you to have a good week in school. We're really looking forward to seeing you. It's going to be, I think you'll find, really useful and really positive. And we're looking forward to getting back and having a bit of normality before the summer holiday. So this really is your last opportunity. Not only will it be really nice for you to see your teacher and have that session in those bucket 3 subjects that you haven't had sessions in, but it will be also an opportunity for you to pick up those last bits from school. Teachers have spent quite a lot of time preparing things for you to collect during that week. Okay, anyway, we'll move on. Next slide. Right, so photo shoot planning, first of all, just a reminder, you need to be thinking about the who, where, when, why, how and what. I have gone over most of these in the previous one, and I've got some examples to kind of highlight what I'm talking about there, so I think I will just move on. Okay, so your planning page should include things like your travel, planning for the weather conditions, so maybe looking at the weather forecast. It would be great if you could take a screenshot or just make a note, weather forecast for the day, time of day, and it would be great if you could reference the sunset and sunrise times, which I think is something like between 4 and 5 a.m. and then between 10 and 11 p.m. So you'd have to either get up very early or stay up fairly late to catch either of those. However, the lighting is better near sunrise and near sunset, and actually because we've got a hot week ahead, I think potentially really quite tricky between 10 a.m. and 3 p.m. when the light is really severe. If you are going to do outdoor photography during those brightest hours, then think about shade, think about trying to get out of the light a bit, because the direct sunlight is going to overexpose your shots. Think about specific locations that you want to go to. Hopefully, maybe there'll be more than one. Maybe one will be inside and one will be outside. Maybe you'll be thinking about going to different areas outside. Don't overthink it. Don't think you need to, get on a bus or anything or travel vast distances. There's lots of different locations fairly close to home, and you can get some variety in there. Maybe you could have a bit of beach time as well. A map would be good. Storyboards, don't forget about storyboards. I mentioned those last time. You can see that's supposed to be the bottom centre yellow image is the storyboard. So just that idea of thinking about your photo shoot in stages, not necessarily thinking, right, I'm going to photograph the same thing 30 times. I mean, you can do that if you walk around it and think about viewpoints and so on, but it would be nice if you maybe thought about bringing in a bit of variety. And a storyboard doesn't need to literally mean a story, like once upon a time, not that kind of story, but just the kind of the sequence of events, how it's all going to play out. Again, so it shows the examiner you're planning, you're refining, you're reviewing, you're developing your ideas. All of those things feed into pretty much every marking area, so it's super important. Props, makeup, costume, you know, or whatever else you might need. Your prop might be the actual thing that you're going to photograph. So it might be if you're doing an object that you take an object to different locations. Lighting I'm going to talk about. Backdrop I'm going to talk about. Sequence and narrative, I think, and equipment. Potentially it's just going to be your cameras and you. But it may be that you can think of other things that you could take along. You know, little things like, oh, I'm going to take a piece of fabric because I want to think about using different backdrops, or I'm going to use a spotlight, so I'm going to grab a couple of spotlights from different people's bedrooms. Okay, that kind of thing. So I've got some examples here of some of the approaches to photography. So Bill Brandt is a black and white photographer. You know, all his photography is black and white. You can see there he's quite interested in humans, and he's also interested in landscape. So a lot of his work focuses on the interaction between humans and landscape. It's that idea of changing the angle, making you see things slightly differently, which is basically the role of the photographer, is to present the world in a different way. That picture in the middle there is actually an elbow. I wonder if you worked that out. In what looks like in a beach setting, but potentially initially you could have thought it was a boulder. You might have thought it was, I don't know, a surfboard, something like that. Rossfeldt is much more analytical, a little bit more scientific, looking at the really interesting structures and forms. Obviously they're black and white photographers, so they focused on form a lot and texture. It may be that you decide to take some of your photos in black and white, or you could just print them black and white. Thomas Sirhan that's kind of macro to an extreme. I think that's potentially kind of microscopic. So you're not going to be able to take photos like that, but it kind of illustrates the fact that a camera can see more than your eye can, potentially. Ernst Haas looks at the landscape within forms. So a little bit like Bill Brandt, but taking the contrasting landscape out of it. So you've just literally got the form itself and the object itself and the kind of forms and the landscape within the form. Ansel Adams, I really like the way that he contextualizes his subject. So you can see he's taken photographs of things close up, but you can also see the surrounding landscape and the interesting play of light there. Really beautifully detailed and textural photography. He's one of the kind of titans of the photography canon. He's one of the best. Stephen Wilkes here taking panoramic shots. So he's done some quite clever things here because it's a cityscape, and if you look to the left, I would imagine that was dawn. So he would have had it on a tripod. He's moving the camera around and taking shots during the course of the day until you get to the far right, which is obviously sunset. That's really nice. But you don't have to do things like that with panoramic photography. Most of your phones have got a panoramic setting on them, and you can do panoramic shots close up as well. So potentially stitching together a series of close up photos will allow you to show more detail, and then because you're doing it panoramic, potentially more of the object than if you were just doing straight close-up. So you might want to consider something like that. Panoramic photography works best when you can get a real vista. So I've taken my photography students to the pier, and we've taken the whole of that coastline. That works quite well. The other thing that works well is going up high, but there aren't many spots, I can tell you that now, in Bournemouth where you can go sufficiently high, unless you live in one of those tower blocks. The Sky Bar at the Hilton, I'm not even sure if you're allowed up there now. Okay, just some quite good examples. This is called Dutch angle or oblique, so you might want to think about using this. Very straightforward. Hopefully you can see what they're doing there. They're just tilting the camera and making use of the lines. So the lines of the zebra crossing, or these lovely perspective lines. I think it looks like a station. I'm going to assume it's a station. So you could easily take some photos like that. You know, whatever you're looking at. So if it's people, you could plonk a person on the bench, or if it's an object, you could put the object on the bench. And then, you know, create that really interesting look to it. But you can see that all four of those examples of Dutch angle and oblique, they work so well because the photographers have chosen pictures with lines in. So they're looking for the lines, whether it's the lines of the tree trunks or the lines of the perspective lines of the platform, or obviously the lines of the zebra crossing. Still life, so Marcus Rodriguez here is influenced by painters and classical still life setup. So think about creating an atmosphere in your still life. Think about, you can, if you really look at these, you can see all of the things that they've unpicked. They've unpicked the backdrop. They thought about that idea of creating an atmosphere. If you look at the bottom right, you know, they thought really carefully about lighting. Top right, interesting use of reflection and close-up. And interesting use of the surface that the still life is sitting on. If I'm photographing a still life, I do tend to drag in a bit of fabric from somewhere. I've got a bit of white fabric that I often use. Portrait or formal, so obviously these are portraits, but that idea of formal and informal photography applies to whatever you're photographing. So for example, so hopefully you can see there that you've got the posed photograph where everyone is aware they're having a photograph taken, except perhaps the dog, and the informal photograph where the girl's just cycling past and the photographer has been a bit more spontaneous and just spotted that opportunity to take a really interesting photograph with interesting colours, and the backdrop works really well. In fact, he probably plonked himself in front of that mural because he thought at some point somebody's going to go past and it's going to work really well, and he was right. Or he or she, sorry, I should say he or she. So formal and informal could be still life, for example, where you have, you know, maybe a very carefully arranged or set up set of objects, or something that's much more spontaneous, something that you've just spotted. So because you're looking at tools, a lot of you, I'm going to mention the tools, you could have the tools all carefully arranged by yourself, or the tools as they are naturally in a toolbox, or maybe they're kind of scattered all over the place, or, you know, mixed up with other things. Maybe they're even being used. That would be a really nice informal photograph. And what are we missing there? The landscape. Yeah, I think the landscape is always going to look pretty formal unless it's got subjects in it. Props, so there's just a few examples, well, 3 examples of really interesting props to use. So the idea of distorted reflections, so that is actually a crystal ball that you can buy for photography, which I'm not recommending. You know, you certainly don't need to do that. You can get a really similar effect with glasses of water. So I've had photography students who've gone out and spent some money on a crystal ball. I think they paid about £5, and you do get some really interesting reflections in it. But then I had somebody who produced equally good photos, but using a glass of water and looking at the way the reflection distorts in a glass of water. Fairy lights are great. You get these points of light to create interest, and the use of mirrors. And mirrors actually are quite a good way of, if you wanted to involve yourself in the photograph, you can be the reflection in the mirror. If you look at the picture on the right with the mirror, my guess is that that the photographer has manipulated that, and that the reflection is not what is actually shown in the mirror. So you can use it as a framing device as well, and do a little bit of Photoshop work afterwards. Backdrops, so just a reminder about backdrops. So you can go for bright contrasting, which we've got in the pink and turquoise example there. You can go for themed backdrops. So for example, if you have a load of objects that are the same colour and then have a backdrop of that colour, that works really well. On the right, we've got examples of high key and low key photography. So the white one is high key and the dark one is low key. So high key is deliberately lightening everything, and potentially even applying white makeup in this example to the model. Low key is obviously very low light, and then having a black backdrop. You know, they do look very slick. They look very commercial, to be honest with you. But don't feel intimidated by that. You can create similar effects on a budget. So for example, the black backdrop, if you find a bit of black clothing which is nice and sort of properly black and absorbs the light, you can have a go at that yourself. And then at the bottom there you can see sort of those use of subdued vintage colours to create a vintage style still life. Light sources, so thinking about where your light's coming from. So the top left looks like natural light, maybe that's a crack in their curtains with the light, natural light streaming through. Top right is an example of coloured light, which you can create with your phones. I think there's an app for it, but literally you can make the whole screen one colour, and then muck about with that and get some interesting effects. Or it may be that you've got some different colour fairy lights or something like that. I quite like the reflection on the water, so that's reflected light on the leaf and puddle there, and then obviously fairy lights again in the bottles. Maybe I should call them LED lights, not fairy lights. Thinking about light angles, so it would be lovely if you could have a go at some of these. That would be very impressive, especially if you had that on your planning page. So you could explore split lighting, Rembrandt lighting, loop lighting, butterfly lighting, but the idea of just moving, shifting spotlights around to create different effects. You don't need all the equipment you've got in the top right corner there. You can literally do it with spotlights from around the house. And I don't know, some people have used bits of tin foil as well for the reflections. Think about perspective, bird's eye, worm's eye. So bird's eye obviously looks quite effective. The worm's eye, don't forget you can either look up or look across on the level. And then actually in the middle there I've got that example of the use of glasses to distort. Very simple to do and looks really effective. Okay, so I mentioned first person, second person, so we've got evidence of the photographer in the left-hand examples. I really like that bottom centre one with the, I don't know, it's a filter or some kind of lens or something being held up and showing a different view. But I have had students doing that just with their hand, looking through. And I had one student holding a ring and using that as a frame. So you can use all sorts of things as frames, but I quite like the way it's being held by the photographer and the way the flower's being held by the photographer. So that could be an angle that you approach, having yourself in the photo. The second person, so obviously those are photographers being photographed with their cameras. So you kind of got two people taking photographs of each other. That could be quite an interesting angle. And then third person obviously is a little bit of people watching. Okay, that is it. I'm sorry that I've talked for 16 minutes. Okay, so the things you are going to need to do now are to write down the ideas that we've gone through in the PowerPoint, and then create your photography planning page and do a photo shoot. And I have to say, the most recent set of photos that you produced, which were completed after you've done your photography planning, were so much better than the average set of year 10 photographs that I get. In fact, better than year 11 and potentially even year 12 photographs, because they've been planned. I was really pleased, and it made me question the way I've taught in the past. I feel like photography planning really is critical, and it will make such a difference to the examiner to see how well you've developed your ideas. So please, don't just do it because you've been told to do it, but really kind of try and engage with it, try and think about what you're going to do in your next set of photos, okay? And don't forget, these photos should feed off the bubble map that you did last week, where you start to explore a different, slightly different approach to the same theme, a different overarching theme, so a different angle to the way that you continue to develop your exam idea. I'm really looking forward to seeing some of you on Friday. And for the rest of you, I hope you have a lovely summer holiday. I hope you have a good time next week in school. We're really looking forward to seeing you. And good luck with your holiday homework. Don't forget to pick your booklets up from the theatre workshop. Hoping you're seeing this. I'm hoping you've sat through nearly 20 minutes of me talking. But anyway, best wishes to all of you. Really looking forward to seeing you in September. Have a lovely holiday. Bye.